Hey, everybody, and welcome to an episode of The Thought Experiment. We have a great debate tonight with two fantastic guests. And the topic, if you didn't already know, is did Jesus exist?
Where ideas enter the ring.
Hey, all right, here we go. I'm super excited for this. I love modding a good debate, and this one is guaranteed to be one of those. So tonight, everybody, my guests, I have uh, the Godless Engineer from Godless Engineer YouTube, who will be arguing the mythicist side of the argument. So, John, if you guys don't know, is a mythicist who does not believe that Jesus ever existed. And his opponent, taking the other side, is Ben Watkins from Real Atheology on YouTube. And he will be debating that Jesus was, in fact, a real person. So, with that, uh, yeah, so we didn't discuss yet, gentlemen. Who would like to go first? I mean, usually there's a protocol for this, but
Well, if it's all right with John. So, since the question is, does was Jesus a historical figure? I'm in the affirmative, so I believe that traditionally I would go first, and John would get the last word. But I obviously want to make sure that John's cool with that.
right. Looks like the thumbs up is positive for John saying the floor is yours, Ben. So we got 10-minute openings. We're going to do a 60-minute open discussion with 5-minute closings to follow that. And then if anyone out there has a question for any of our guests, feel free to send a super chat. I will guarantee to read any super chats you send me, assuming they're respectful and legible. But if you've got a good question and you just don't have like 2 cents to rub together, shoot it into the chat. And if I think it's a good question, I'll note it and I'll make sure to ask it at the end of the debate. And with that, Ben, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, let me first start off by thanking John for agreeing to have this discussion today. We're both engineers, so it's nice to be able to finally have one of these sorts of discussions with a peer. So thank you again for agreeing to do this. So my framework is that of metaphysical naturalism. I proceed from the axiom that causal reality is exhausted by the natural world. Within this architecture, there is no God. Consequently, Jesus was not divine, and his resurrection is not a historical event. One common Christian contention, which I engage with utmost seriousness, is that the historical evidence itself provides a rational foundation for belief in the resurrection. That is, history alone gives us reason to doubt metaphysical naturalism in general and atheism in particular. My objection, however, is fundamentally Humean. For any miracle testimony to command our rational assent, its falsehood must represent a greater miracle than the event it attests. The testimony for the resurrection fails to clear this formidable bar. Its potential for error or deception is no miracle at all. The Humean challenge, therefore, is to demonstrate that the falsehood of the resurrection testimony would be a greater miracle than the resurrection itself. The historical evidence does not begin to approach such a standard. The historical record provides an even starker comparison. The testimony for the witchcraft at Salem, in both quality and quantity, surpasses that for any resurrection in Jerusalem. Yet no rational mind accepts the reality of Salem's witches, for the explanation of mass hysteria requires no suspension of natural laws. The resurrection, therefore, fails by the stronger argument. If the superior evidence for witchcraft is insufficient, the inferior evidence for the resurrection cannot possibly command our assent. Let me be clear. My Humean skepticism of the resurrection does not rest on the flimsy foundation of mythicism. The historical Jesus is not the target of this critique. Nor, finally, does my argument draw any crude analogy to the figure of Hercules. It neither assails the grounding of Christian belief as analogous to founding a pantheon on a demigod, nor does it dismiss Jesus himself as a mere mythical archetype. The proper historical analogy for Jesus, therefore, is not the mythical Hercules, it is Plato's mouthpiece Socrates, or the revolutionary Spartacus. My vantage is not that of the historian, immersed in the textual particulars, but that of the philosopher, trained to recognize the structural architecture of an argument. From this external perspective, a striking analogy emerges. Jesus' mythicism is to history what young earth creationism is to biology. Though this parallel may provoke incredulity from mythicists, it is beyond dispute that both mythicism and young earth creationism exist as fringe theories within academia, rejected by the overwhelming consensus of secular and religious scholars alike, and both are virtually absent from the peer reviewed literature of their respective fields. This shared intellectual exile demands an explanation. What accounts for their inability to penetrate the mainstream of academic discourse? And does any common structural feature explain the mere demographics of their adherents? Theists for creationism, atheists for mythicism. Two hypotheses naturally present themselves. The first posits a pervasive institutional bias within the scholarly communities themselves, one that afflicts secular and religious scholars alike. The second suggests a shared distorted ideology that sustains both fringe theories from without. Neither hypothesis is sufficient. The true common ancestor of both Jesus mythicism and young earth creationism, I will argue, is a methodological one, an overly narrow empiricism. This methodological error generates at least two expectations. First, mainstream scholarship, unconstrained by this restrictive standard, should offer a more parsimonious and explanatory potent account of the evidence. Second, the narrow standard itself, when applied with intellectual consistency, should collapse into absurdity. We will now test the first of these expectations. The modern evolutionary synthesis commands an explanatory virtue far superior to that of young earth creationism. It unifies a vaster array of disparate facts. Universal common ancestry resolves convergent patterns across the genome, and the fossil record more elegantly than special creation, just as descent with modification and natural selection map the distributions of species more precisely than a global flood. Furthermore, evolutionary theory seamlessly coheres with modern cosmology, astronomy, and geology. It achieves this optimal balance of explaining the most while assuming the least. The architecture of history, I argue, is no different. Assessed by the strictures of multiple attestation, contextual plausibility, and explanatory coherence, the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis secures a superior integration of our earliest independent Christian sources to rival hypotheses that treat Jesus as mythical, merely ethical, or solely political. Consider specific data points. First, the apocalyptic language. Our earliest sources, Paul and Mark, independently attest that the kingdom of God is at hand. While apocalyptic motifs were a common feature of the era, the convergence of this specific urgent theme across otherwise disparate traditions finds a more parsimonious explanation in historical apocalyptic preacher than in coordinated literary invention or independent mythic construction. Next, the radical ethics. Jesus' radical ethical teachings, the renunciation of wealth, the subordination of familial ties, the last becoming first, cohere within an apocalyptic framework. While one could certainly imagine such ethics arising independently, their systematic integration with apocalyptic expectations across our sources points more parsimoniously to a singular historical figure than to the scattered coincidences of literary elaboration. And then finally, the temple incident. Bolstered by multiple attestation and strong contextual fit within Second Temple Judaism, Jesus' prophetic indictment of the temple finds its optimal explanation in the symbolic grammar of Jewish apocalypticism, rather than in the language of a political revolt. By contrast, rival hypotheses leave the threefold convergence of apocalyptic proclamation, radical ethics, and symbolic action as a fractured, inexplicable array. The apocalyptic prophet hypothesis uniquely unifies these features and renders intelligible why, after Jesus' crucifixion, his followers reinterpreted these events as inaugurating an impending apocalypse. We now arrive at the second expectation. An overly constricting standard of evidence, when consistently applied across antiquity, must inevitably collapse into absurdity. The plausibility of the mythicist position turns on an evidentiary standard our sources for Jesus cannot meet, demanding contemporaneous documentation, freedom from theological influence, and robust external corroboration. For the sake of argument, we shall provisionally adopt this narrow empiricist framework. one that stipulates a figure's historicity is secure only when attested by early, independent, and non-theologically shaped sources. With this brittle standard now stipulated, intellectual consistency demands we apply it across the whole of the ancient world. The consequences are catastrophic. The edifice of our historical knowledge begins to crumble. Socrates is the first to fall. He left behind no writings, and our knowledge of him is filtered entirely through a handful of sources, ideologically committed followers, and a comic playwright, each with a distorting agenda of their own. If such interested testimony is inadmissible, the historical Socrates dissolves. Spartacus follows him into the abyss. Our principal chronicles of his rebellion emerge only after a 200-year silence, a gulf of time fourfold wider than that for the Gospels. If such a temporal distance is disqualifying, the historical Spartacus evaporates. Finally, the foundations of even Hannibal's history begin to fracture. Our accounts are preserved almost entirely through the hostile lens of his Roman conquerors, writing generations later. If reliance on hostile or derivative sources undermines credibility, then the man who crossed the Alps and shattered Roman legions dissolves. His entire campaign collapses into the propaganda of the victor. This intellectual carnage is the necessary and absurd consequence of the mythicists' restrictive standard. The very standards proposed here to secure historical truth demolish history itself, leaving a void where Socrates, Spartacus, and Hannibal once stood. The mythicists' hypothesis therefore purchases its plausibility at an extortionate price, the abandonment of the very historical method that allows us to know anything of the ancient world at all. The brittle standard has shattered under its own weight. The analogy between these domains, however, is one of proportion, not equivalence. Our confidence that Jesus was an apocalyptic prophet should not equal our confidence in universal common ancestry, or that life's complexity is best explained by descent with modification by natural selection. The analogy should not collapse standards across domains like that. Rather, our confidence in Jesus' historicity should be proportional to that which we grant other ancient figures, like Socrates or Spartacus, just as our confidence in the modern synthesis should be proportional to that which we grant other bedrock scientific theories, like atomic theory or the germ theory of disease. Yet my conclusion remains grounded in a broadly Humean skepticism. To understand Jesus as a historical apocalyptic prophet is also to understand him as a failed one. Nothing argued here compels a commitment to Christianity generally
All
or
right, that's
resurrection
your
in
time.
particular.
Did you have another like last sentence, perhaps, or are you good?
We can't stop there. I did have last sentence.
Say the sentence.
One may rationally disagree with Christian theology while charitably conceding the historicity of its founder, just as a Christian may rationally disagree with naturalism while conceding the explanatory power of evolution.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, John, Godless Engineer. I'm not sure, but I think you're routing the wrong mic into the stream.
No, it's the right mic.
Oh, okay.
Is it like really loud?
There's a lot of background noise. Like you got fans on and stuff.
No.
It's not tragic. While you're talking, the background noise seems to go away. But in any case, cool.
Okay.
All right. So real quick, yeah. So Ben, thank you very much for your opening. John, you're up next. I'm just going to remind everyone in the chat once again, if you have questions for our debaters tonight, feel free to super chat. I will guarantee to read any super chats you guys ask, assuming they're respectful and legible. But again, we're equal opportunity here. If you have a question, but you don't feel like super chatting or can't super chat or whatever the reason may be, maybe you just don't like super chatting, that's fair enough. Just at me, Yahooligan, in the chat with your questions, and I will take them down. And maybe I'll ask them, and maybe I won't. Okay, John, the floor is all yours. 10 minutes.
Okay. Can y'all hear me now? Is it?
You sound
I turned
good.
on my. Okay. I turned on my noise gate, so hopefully that works out.
As
well.
long as while you're talking, it seems to like mute everything in your background. So
Yeah. It should. Let's. Okay. So I'll go ahead and start. Minimal mythicism is defined by 5 propositions. 1, Jesus originated as a celestial deity. 2, communicated only through revelation, visions, scripture. Underwent his passion in a supernatural realm, was later given an allegorical earthly story, and finally 5 subsequent communities mistook the allegory for history. Now, I come from a minimal mythicist position on this, and minimal mythicism is a Bayesian argument, where we first have to properly contextualize the prior likelihood of Jesus existing before we even get into the evidence. And then once we add the evidence in, we compare both the prior likelihood to the evidence that we have, and we come up with the likelihood that he existed. So before we dive into the evidence to either support or disprove the propositions that I just previously listed, we have to properly contextualize how Jesus appears in our earliest records. This creates our baseline for analyzing the evidence for and against his historicity. To formulate this baseline, we will analyze Jesus from both Paul's perspective and that of most Christians, as reflected in the Gospels. Minimal mythicism doesn't claim that Jesus doesn't exist because Paul didn't mention him. Specious arguments from silence aren't going to make the case today. It's a comparison between 2 hypotheses, minimal historicism and minimal mythicism. To do that comparison, we need a baseline to start from. That baseline is built on 2 pillars, rank-Raglan hero type and Christianity as a mystery cult. First, Jesus fits the rank-Raglan hero type microgenre perfectly. It's a set of 22 mystic features that cluster together across ancient heroes. Some features are the hero's mother is a virgin, the father is a king or heir of a king, an attempt is made to kill him as a child. He's driven from his throne, he dies atop a hill, his body is not buried in a normal tomb. If the character matches 12 or more features, it's most likely not a historical figure. Figures that score high on this scale are Oedipus, Theseus, Romulus, Hercules, Perseus, Dionysus, Moses, Joseph, Bellerophon, Jason, Pelops, Asclepius, Zeus, and Watugunung. None of these are historical figures. They are all mythological figures. Jesus just so happens to score 20 out of 22 in Matthew, and Mark alone racks up 14 points. Chrissy Hansen has identified a few historical figures. For instance, Alexander, Mithridates, and Apollonius of Tyana, who match this hero type. So historical figures can rank high on this scale. What that does, though, is that it increases our pool of figures disproportionately so that it drives an a fortiori likelihood from the original 33% that was figured up in 2014 by Richard Carrier to 26%. So we start off, so we are not off to a great start with the minimal historical Jesus. If there is a historical core to it, the evidence should overcome this bad start. The next pillar is the mystery cults. At the time Christianity was born, the region was saturated with dying and rising savior gods who offered salvation to their initiates. Osiris is one such figure. He was killed, resurrected, and his cult taught baptism and ritual communion. Plutarch tells us that insiders knew the passion occurred in the sublunar heavens, while outsiders were told a historicized Egyptian version. Other figures that match this pattern are Inanna Dumuzi, Baal, Marduk, Adonis, Attis, Zalmoxis, Romulus, and Dionysus. Each one is a son or daughter of God. They underwent a passion and mediated salvation through a ritual initiation. Another figure is Ixion, who was crucified in the celestial realm and was a popular subject in pre-Christian Pompeian art. Every mystery cult had a savior deity, a passion narrative, a baptismal initiation, and symbolically reenacted the god's ordeal, and a ritual meal that united initiates with the god. All 4 of these features are fundamental to Christianity. We even have a 2nd century church father admitting as much. Justin Martyr says the sons of Zeus suffered and died, and that Christians are just saying Jesus did it better. This occurs in Apology 1:21 through 22. To make matters worse, Philo of Alexandria, a contemporary of Paul, but not a Christian, already knew of a pre-existent celestial archangel who was the firstborn son of God, God's agent of creation, God's celestial high priest, the image of God, a spiritual counterpart to Adam. Adding to all that, Philo's reading of Zechariah 6:12 would easily lead you to one of the names of this archangel being Jesus. That's 10 distinctive attributes of the Christian Jesus already attached to this archangel before Christianity even existed. All the building blocks Christianity needed to emerge as a celestial savior cult were already in circulation in the region. Jewish angelology and messianism on one side, Hellenistic dying and rising savior cults on the other. Christianity didn't need a historical founder to explain its origin. All it needed was a person or persons to syncretize what was already in Judaism with the Hellenistic culture in which the Jews were living. Now on to the evidence that should sway the conclusion. Historians need evidence that is much more likely to exist if Jesus did than if he didn't. Let's take a look at that evidence that should sway us to the historicist position. Paul the Apostle is our first stop on our evidential examination. Paul mentions Jesus or Christ more than 280 times in his authentic letters. His crucifixion comes up 15 or more times, his resurrection 30 or more times. Even though Paul speaks so much about these crucial plot points of Jesus' story, there is not a single concrete earthly biographical detail. There is absolutely nothing about his life before his death and resurrection. He explicitly tells us in Galatians 1:11 through 16 that he got his gospel not from any man, but by revelation. Romans 16:25 through 26, Paul says that Scripture and Revelation are the gospel source. In Romans 1:3, Paul does not say born or descendant. He uses genomnanu, ex spermatos David katasarka, which means having come out of the sperm of David according to the flesh. That is manufactured language, not biological birth language. Paul knew the difference between genomai and genao, but specifically chose genomai. This choice of words was so surprising that even Tertullian explicitly noted Paul chose made over born for Jesus. Paul repeats this word choice in Philippians 2:7 and 1 Corinthians 15:45. Some translations also choose made over born. Galatians 1:19 is sometimes taken to refer to as a brother of the Lord, but on closer examination, we find key grammatical indications that this isn't necessarily the case. First of all, every baptized Christian in Paul's letters is a brother or sister of the Lord. Paul uses brother 122 times, and it's only 2 verses where historicists want it to mean biological kin as opposed to fictive kinship. L. Paul Trudinger notes that Paul's Greek grammar in Galatians 1:19 excludes James from the category of apostles, not the category of brothers. So Paul is distinguishing between apostles and regular Christians. This isn't a specious argument from silence. The question is, which hypothesis better predicts what Paul's letters actually look like? Paul's silence on Jesus' earthly life is much more expected if Jesus was a celestial revelation than if he was a recently deceased Galilean preacher whose followers were still alive. I know that I'm limited on time here, so the next popular reference is Josephus. The Testimonium Flavianum has multiple converging lines of evidence that show it's a whole interpolation. Ken Olson, Paul Hopper, Nicholas List, Nicholas Allen, Chrissy Hansen all confirm this. The other passage in Antiquities 2200 is just an accidental interpolation, and we can go into why that is further in discussion if need be. Other evidence, such as Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, and the Gospels, they don't help at all either. Even if Tacitus even if authentic Tacitus just regurgitates what 2nd century Christians believed at the time. But there are plenty of sources that help support the minimal mythicist hypothesis. First Clement writes as if Jesus was a celestial figure who communicated with the apostles only by revelation that does not contain any of his earthly ministry. Hebrews 9:24 and 8 seem to indicate that Jesus' sacrifice occurred in a celestial temple rather than an earthly one. That leads us to the ascension of Isaiah. In its earliest redaction actually has Jesus descending from the upper heavens to the lower heavens to the firmament where he is killed by Satan and his demons. And then he is buried and resurrects there. The fact that Paul characterizes Jesus just as Philo describes Jesus, just as Philo describes his Logos figure, is more expected under mythicism than historicism. Each of the propositions entailed by mythicism has a direct support from both within early Christianity and outside the movement. So where are we at on this evidence? The only Jesus Paul or the earliest record describes as a celestial being, That's it. And there are no other supporting pieces of evidence. And it just makes more sense for him not to have been a historical figure. But the conclusion isn't that mythicism is certain. The conclusion is that mythicism is, on the evidence, more probable than historicism.
All right. Thank you very much, John. All right, folks. And it's now time, as I set up time, we're going to just open this up. An open discussion. We're going to let our two participants, both John and Ben, discuss the topic of did Jesus exist for the next 60 minutes. But before I unleash them, just going to remind everybody, thank you, first of all, for showing up to this debate. If you haven't hit the like button yet, I am deeply offended, but that's okay. You can make up for it by hitting the like button. And if you're not subscribed, well, then you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, okay? We're taking super chats. If you ask a super chat question for our guests, I promise I will read it at the end of the debate. If super chat's not your thing, but you really want to ask a question, just at me, Yahooligan, in the chat. I'll write it down, and maybe I'll ask it, maybe I won't. We'll see how time goes. All right, gentlemen, the floor is all yours.
All right. First off, let me thank John for his opening statement. So what we haven't mentioned yet is that John and I both swapped our opening statements beforehand to try to minimize any talking past one another, avoid quote unquote gotcha questions, and have a more substantive discussion. But when we did just swap our opening statements, I think there was some worry on John's end that I wasn't going to talk about the specifics of historical evidences. And so I wanted to go ahead and clear that up now at the front. That's not the case.
Well, can I, sorry to interrupt, but I'm wondering if you can at least recognize that my minimal mythicism is not what your opening characterized.
Well, sure. Well, so when I wrote my opening statement, I didn't have your opening statement. So I didn't know quite which direction you were going to go. So that's perfectly fair. The intention with my opening statement was to establish some common ground that I felt confident you would be willing to accept, that you reject young earth creationism.
Well, I specifically wore this shirt tonight.
Yeah. So I was confident that this was common ground between the two of us. And so I wanted to use that as the lens from which we understand more abstract points that I wanted to make, which were from the philosophy of science, which is evaluating hypotheses and asking what is the best inference to the best explanation, giving well-articulated hypotheses, which I think you did, and then going through the evidences. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you said you were coming from a Bayesian perspective.
Right.
Yeah, so I think all of that has to do with the philosophy of science. And like the creation versus evolution debate, I don't actually think that we can make much progress or resolve our disagreements by doing more history in particular. The history is whatever the history is. The way to make progress, I think, is just like in the evolution versus creation debate, is to do more philosophy of science.
Well, so Ben, let me, just so that I understand what you're saying here, is that the progress to be made in our discussion here is not to do history, but instead to pivot into where you specifically are focused, like just the philosophy here, like that. So the evidence has no bearing whatsoever on the conclusion. I feel like that's what you're saying.
Well, no, I think there is. So the evidence plays a role in the sense that the evidence is what we're evaluating. But when we say what is, so if we're doing it using an inference to the best explanation, what do we mean by that? I take you to mean that it's an inference to the most probable hypothesis. So we have to do things like evaluate prior probabilities and posterior probabilities. We have to have some method for doing that. Well, the methodology for doing that is not going to come from history. Like the historical contents are whatever they are, whatever the data in which we're using and plugging in to, let's say, Bayesianism, using Bayes' theorem. That just is whatever it is, correct?
No.
See, maybe this is a place where we would potentially disagree. Why would you disagree with that?
Well, because a lot of this is based in what did these authors mean, and the evidence is not so cut and dry as like with Spartacus or any of the other people that you listed at the very beginning of in your opening statement there, but for which we have vastly different kind, quality, and quantity of evidence than we have for Jesus. So really this does come down to like, what did the earliest people that wrote about Jesus actually say, and how can we understand what they wrote to mean, right? So like one good example of this is Galatians 1:19, where it says
what they wrote is not in dispute. Like, we're not going to be able to resolve our disagreement.
No, but
by
no, hold
looking
on.
at
But
more
it
of
is
what they wrote.
Ben. I was in the middle of explaining though. Okay, how it is
Okay.
in dispute. It is in dispute because in Galatians 1:19 it talks about how the only people that Paul saw there was Cephas and James, the brother of the Lord. Right, but the grammar there is specifically, and this is argued, this is disputed amongst scholars out there, that the grammar to historicists seems to indicate that he's a blood relative, when in reality the word that's used there and the phrase and the structure of the sentence just renders this James as being a brother, like a fictive kinship brother, right? It could mean either, and that's why it's vague. And on minimal mythicism, I believe on the a fortiori side of it, Richard Carrier actually places this in favor of his historicity. It's just not a very strong piece of evidence.
No, that's all well and good. So the point that I was trying to make is more general. So when we have any explanation, when we were trying to make an explanatory inference, explanations are divided into two features: the explanandum and the explanans. So the former being the thing that's being explained, and the latter being the thing doing the explaining. So in the example that you just gave is the explanandum is what is written, the thing that historians have gone out and identified as this is the thing that's going to be done, that needs explaining, the datum, the explanandum. And your interpretation is what's doing the explaining. So we're not going to do history and get more explanandums.
I feel like we're not. So Ben, sorry to interrupt again, but I feel like we're not doing history because you don't know how to do history, whereas I do know how to do history.
fair enough.
I'm not a historian either, but I know how to do history.
Fair enough. I'm not trying to dispute you on the historical grounds, just like I wouldn't try to dispute a biologist on the biological grounds. But when it comes to the creation versus evolution debate, what the creationists and the evolution disagree about is not what they observe in biology. What they disagree about is how to explain those facts of biology, the complexity of life.
Ben, I'm sorry. Have you never taken part in like a young Earth creationist like debate or anything like that?
Well, I just, for Relay Theology, if you go to my Twitter page, it's my pinned tweet, I just debated a young Earth creationist.
Right. Well, I mean, you would know that what you just said is completely wrong because they do debates like the evidence, not just like their interpretation of the evidence or what's the best explanation for this evidence. They literally debate like they'll debate, what it means to have a perfect genetic code. And to respond to your opening there, Ben, which I mean, honestly, my initial reaction to it was pretty shocked that you would poison the well at the very beginning of this and commit such an egregious fallacy coming from a philosopher, I found to be quite surprising on your part. To poison the well like you did, because it's very obvious that minimal mythicism, the mythicism that I employ, is definitely not anything quite near young earth creationism. For one thing, I can name you right now, I can pull a list of names of about 40 New Testament scholars and historians that think that mythicism is at least plausible enough to warrant discussion in the larger New Testament field. Okay, can you name one evolutionary biologist that thinks that that's the case, like a published and working evolutionary biologist that advances the creationist agenda?
Well, so there's obviously the intelligent design movement as people who are reputable people in the field that dissent
Of
from-
evolutionary biology.
So I'm thinking of Michael Behe off the top of my head, but he's, I think, a chemist. But there's
So
other.
not an evolutionary biologist. Okay.
But it's certainly easy to find people who are sympathetic, who are scholars to both young earth creationism or its more modern version, intelligent design. And
Yeah, well,
the
you see,
point
so
I'm trying
I've
to
got.
make- but
Well, yeah, but Ben, you see, the point that I'm trying to make is that you're desperately trying to put mythicism on the same ground as young earth creationism. And if I can give a very specific example from young earth creationism, like one of the arguments that they make, they make the specified complexity argument, right? They'll say like the flagellum on a bacterium, it has to have all of its parts in order for it to move, right? And without that, without all of its parts working in the exact order that they should be working in, then you just simply wouldn't have it. So therefore, that's evidence of creation. Somebody had to create it, right? But when under my methodology here for minimal mythicism, what we would have to take is all of the evidence into account before we even start looking at the evidence for whatever that they're claiming, right? So the fact that we've got several different lab experiments out there that show that we can individually remove proteins from flagellum, and the only thing that happens is it affects its mobility, immediately undercuts the whole creationist narrative. And when you factor that into the Bayesian model, it is definitely going to it's not going to be able to, whatever they say about the flagellum and everything like that, it's not even going to register. It's going to render the whole creationism question flat, like dead on arrival, right? It's going to be DOA. Okay. So my methodology actually works for evolution and against young earth creationism when you apply it.
So I would want to point out here that first, the analogy is not meant to poison any well. So if it were to poison a well, it would similarly poison a well in my wheelhouse. So my point of drawing the analogy is to say that, look, there is a consensus of relevant scholars that reject this, and that there are the people that uniformly either religious or non-religious.
Ben, so sorry, I'm not trying to interrupt you, but I feel like you're pacing, and when you pace too far away from the phone, it's a little difficult for me to hear you.
Fair enough. So what explains this fact? And so I actually think that what explains this fact are the patterns of reasoning on both sides of those debates, and that those patterns of reasoning are analogous. And so, to give an example, so you tonight said that, look, here are some similarities between other mythical figures, and that if you were to score some number of these similarities, then that is a reason to think that the figure is historically mythical. This is the
No,
exact...
I'm sorry. Can I correct you just a little bit?
Sure, but I'd really like to finish this point, and then maybe you can come back and correct if I've misrepresented you.
Okay.
So this is exactly parallel to Pele's watch argument. So the idea that life has certain features, and that if life were to have certain amount of features, that's a reason to think that it was designed rather than a result of a mindless chance process. Now, the question would then be there, why do you reject Pele's explanation of life by analogies to the watch, but use that same pattern of reasoning? It's either an argument by analogy or an inductive generalization or a significance test, something maybe you can clear up the exact form of that. But if you wouldn't accept the reasoning in the one case, which I'm pretty confident you don't, why do you think the reasoning would work here? And do you think that might be the reason why the relevant consensus of historians don't accept that?
Okay, I feel like there's a few questions there. First off, Bayesian methodology would actually rule out Paley's watch argument because we obviously have a natural explanation for why a watch would be there, and that natural explanation is somebody created it. And then it's a false analogy to then compare that to the natural world, where we have natural processes that don't require active agents, conscious agents, in order to in order for those things to come into existence or be in existence, right? So we would have to apply that, those pieces of evidence to, our equation, if you will, for Bayesian reasoning. Now, as far as the Rank-Raglan microgenre, the hero type, this is actually a recognized hero type in folklorist literature. And so it's not just that, there are these characteristics that seem to be like a parallelomania sort of situation here. This is a recognized genre in the Mediterranean area at this time, right? And folklorists have recognized it outside of the Mediterranean area. But for these figures in the ancient history that match this classical hero type, they all seem to follow along those lines. And it's made by a very statistical sampling of the figures that match high on this list that they typically do not exist in history. And that is a very notable thing to take notice of whenever we're starting out with the question. Like this is before we even start considering evidence.
So this is a great point. So you said that there's a very representative sample. So it sounds to me like there's that the form of that argument is an inductive generalization. So that certain objects have this feature with this amount of frequency in a sample. So therefore, probably the next object we observe with those features will also be within that same category of sample. Now,
you keep desperately trying to make my position to be fallacious, but it's simply just not.
Well, no. I'm not. No. I'm not saying like there's some logical fallacy here. I mean, inductive generalization is there's obviously the problem of induction, but putting that to one side, I mean, we obviously use inductive generalizations to go about the world. I'm not some radical skeptic in that sense. But I think you're right in saying that the way to respond to Pele's argument, which is also an inductive sample of the same form, is to use something like a Bayesian argument or an inference to the best explanation to say, no, look, here is a hypothesis. And given that hypothesis, there are certain explanatory virtues. In the Bayesian language, you would say that the prior probability of the hypothesis is higher than the competing one, or that it has the best balance between prior probability and posterior probability, or what's called the likelihood. So you might say that the likelihood ratio favors one hypothesis over the other, and the prior probability and therefore you can say this is an inference to the most probable explanation. Notice in saying all that, I've said nothing about history. I've talked entirely about the nature of explanation in comparing different methods. And so if you can understand.
So well, I'm just kind of curious. What ground do you think that you have gained on your side of this?
Well, because at that point, within that framework, we can now see the structure of the inference to the Beck's explanation that has convinced the majority of scholars in this area. So, would you agree that the consensus view is that Jesus was an apocalyptic prophet consistent with apocalyptic Jewish thought of the time?
The consensus of New Testament scholars, I would agree. It is the consensus, but I typically this is brought up in an appeal to authority.
You were cutting out there a little. I just give that thought again. Sorry, you were cutting out.
Right. Typically, this is brought up in an appeal to authority fallacy. Is that what you're trying to do here? Like because
No, not at
because
all.
this.
No,
Okay.
no, not at all. So, well, first off, appeal to authority fallacy occurs when we appeal to a non-relevant authority. I think
No. You need no. I think you need to educate yourself on that, there, Ben, because that's
You're
appeal
cutting
to
out
false.
again?
That's appeal. That's an appeal to false authority. What I'm talking about is an appeal to authority when authority is your only evidence for whatever conclusion.
We're not able to hear you. Is it something on my end? Are y'all able to hear him?
So
And
I can hear John fine. I hear Ben fine. Ben, can you hear me?
yes,
Okay, so I'm not sure
Okay.
why you can hear me and not John.
it was just cutting out. It might be something on my end. So that's why I
Okay,
was
yeah,
asking.
I moved my mic closer and I turned my noise gate down a little bit. So.
It might be something on my end then. So
Okay.
sorry about that.
No, it's okay. No,
carry on.
appeal. Yeah, so appeal to authority is when you're just using the authority. So like what you just said sounded eerily like you're just proclaiming that the authorities are convinced by this, so we should trust the authorities. I feel like that's where you were going.
Did you hear him, Ben? Ben?
Oh, I think Ben's Wi-Fi might have went out. Maybe.
Ben, blink twice if you can hear us. All right. Yeah.
Wait,
So let's
Ben
pause
popped
the
up
talk
again.
for a moment. Okay.
Can y'all hear me?
Oh,
There
I
we
can
go.
hear
we got you
y'all.
now.
I can hear y'all now. Sorry about
We've
this.
Sorry.
swapped sides.
Not yet.
Sorry, Ben. Ben, we've swapped sides. You've got to argue for mythicism now.
Yeah. Well played. The old switcheroo. No one ever expects the
Both of
Spanish
your arguments were
Inquisition.
so convincing. You guys just swapped positions.
So, but to come back, so I'm not trying to appeal to authority at all in this case. My question is,
Okay.
I bring that up to say, why do the consensus of the relevant scholars in this field accept the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis as the best explanation on offer for the historical data that we have?
Well,
And so
first
that's
of
where the
all,
history comes in.
No. So first of all, I feel like you paring Jesus down to that and then saying, well, the majority of New Testament scholars, accept this. I feel like you're totally misrepresenting that right there, because the vast swath of New Testament scholars are going to be dogmatically adhering Christians. Now, I'm not trying to like poison the well of them because they're Christian. They can't be
No, that's a
objective about
perfectly
this.
fair. That's a perfectly fair observation, and I think that's
Okay.
one that we should make.
So
but
so
we would
I would
also say
well, hold on.
that
Hold on, let me finish. So I would say that the vast swath of New Testament scholars don't just believe in the apocalyptic prophet that you've dwindled Jesus into. I feel like the vast majority, and there's no like surveys or anything like that out there of all New Testament scholars or anything like that. But considering the nature of the job and considering how well that particular field is controlled, you would have to say that the majority of them actually believe in the magical form of Jesus that's contained in the Gospels. A majority of them are going to be arguing for a resurrection. A majority of them are going to be arguing for the events in the Gospels as being historical fact, right? So the vast majority, if you were going to go along those lines, is going to be the magical form of Jesus. Now, slightly more than the mythicist position, obviously, but I think the apocalyptic prophet is going to be second in that. So your position right there really is only leading mythicism by a slim margin compared to what the vast majority of New Testament scholars actually accept.
So my understanding is that the consensus consists of religious and non-religious scholars, whereas the mythicist camp is entirely atheist or naturalist. Correct?
No, that's not true.
So we have
No,
Christians.
we've got
religious
Christian
people who-
mythicists. Yeah, there's Christian mythicists out there.
I believe that's strange credulity. I've never encountered it. Maybe it's like a baby pigeon that you're sure it exists. I've just never seen it.
No, it's Thomas Brody. He's no longer with us, as far as I know, but he actually was fired from a school that he founded because he wrote a memoir, or he wrote something where he admitted that he's a Christian mythicist. So I mean, there's at least one. There's probably more.
I mean that sounds as implausible as an atheist young Earth creationist. To my mind, at least.
So I guess
enough.
I guess Thomas Brody just doesn't exist then.
I would be curious as to what his actual views were, because, if you don't believe Jesus existed, in what substantive sense are you Christian?
All you have to do is believe in the saving nature of Christ. Paul didn't. He believed in an archangel figure of Jesus that's laid out. That's at least agreed upon by Bart Ehrman, who I'm sure that you'd appeal to in this particular situation. Bart says that Paul believed in Jesus as an archangel, and so Thomas Brody felt that Jesus was just another archangel that did secure eternal salvation for people. He just did not have to. He doesn't have to do it here on Earth.
Okay, well, let's concede that point then for the sake of discussion, because the broader point that I'd like to make is one that I think has to do with the philosophy of science. And the philosophy of science is that the consensus of relevant scholars think that the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis is the best explanation because of an inference to it as the best explanation from certain facts. And we will get into those facts in a second, but the reason that they think that it's the best explanation given those facts is because it's the explanation that's the most parsimonious, it has the most explanatory power, it has the widest explanatory scope, and it's most coherent with our background knowledge.
Okay,
so those are
virtues. Right. So I would agree with you that particular version of Jesus would be the minimal historical Jesus, and it is something that we should find in history, right? But the fact is, Ben, we don't, because we don't have any evidence whatsoever to suggest that particular figure that would be distinctive of the Jesus of Christianity walked the earth. Our earliest evidence has Jesus as a purely celestial figure that only revealed his salvation and his message and his gospel through scriptures and revelation.
So once again, I think you're here confusing what is the explanandum and what is the explanans. So
I'm not confusing anything, Ben. I'm just going by what the evidence shows. I've agreed with you. Right.
Well, but that's the argument that you have to make the argument that you have to make is that the explanatory virtues of the mythicist hypothesis are there's more explanatory virtues in that hypothesis than in the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis. You have to say that it's some balance of more parsimonious, has more explanatory power, has the widest explanatory scope, or is more coherent with with our background knowledge.
Yes,
Like,
and
that's the
maybe
argument.
we can rewind the debate and go back to my opening, because my opening actually dealt with that particular thing.
So that's where I would want to say that your argument patterns in your opening are analogous to certain arguments made by creationists against the
Okay,
evolution
name one.
hypothesis. So I've already named one. So you
Which
gave
one?
the criteria of a mythical figure, scoring a certain number of it using some sample, and that sample gave us reason to think a fortiori. So I assume this is about the prior probability. That the prior probability of Jesus being mythical is high before we even look at the evidence. At least that's how I think your
So
argument
you're
is.
gonna
Correct me if I'm wrong.
well so you're gonna deny that the rank Raglan classical hero type is an actual hero type?
No, I'm going to argue that the way in which we respond to that is by putting forward a better hypothesis, one using a Bayesian method, an inference to the best explanation, an inference to the most probable hypothesis, that says, no, given the fact that a Jesus existed and was an apocalyptic prophet, we better explain a wider scope of data more parsimoniously, and in a way that's more coherent with our background knowledge. Now, to cash out on
How
those
is it
claims,
more coherent? How is the apocalyptic prophet more coherent?
well, because it takes place within the already expected
Is there
tradition
any
of
evidence for it?
the Jewish apocalyptic, the immediate Jewish context of the time and location. So at the
The
time and
immediate
location,
Jewish context. What's the immediate Jewish context?
the immediate Jewish context of the time period is that the kingdom of God would be issued in this lifetime, that it was imminent, that that Satan and his cohorts were in charge of the world, and that Jesus was, or that God was going to bring about a Messiah. And that Messiah was going to deliver everyone from the evils of Satan and his cohorts and reestablish the kingdom of God. And so it
Okay.
already fit. We don't have to go to external sources in order to explain
Where
all the
do I
data.
go to where do I go to external sources?
So you are importing so in that inductive sample, your sampling included mythical figures that are certainly existed in the area of the outside external to the Jewish tradition that Jesus is
Right.
proposed
I
to have been
listed
part
yeah.
of.
Yeah, so Ben, what I did was I listed off the figures in history that actually match the rank Raglan classical hero type, right? And
Sure.
that's not me appealing to outside sources in order to characterize them. That was just giving you a sampling of what I'm talking about. In that all of those figures match a high number of those particular attributes. So, do you mind if I run through the rank Raglan hero type, keeping in mind that the rank Raglan hero type is meant to characterize either a Matthew or a Mark Jesus?
Sure, if that's how you want to use your time in the open discussion, sure. Go ahead.
Oh yeah,
One
sure.
moment,
Okay,
John.
so
John, if I may, just real quick. I just want to take a moment to let both of you and our audience know that we're about halfway through our open discussion here. Okay, so I want to thank all of you for showing up and checking out the debate and supporting our debaters. And don't forget, if you have any questions for them, feel free to add a super chat or just at me a question. And at the end of the debate, our debaters will be happy to answer those questions. With that, yeah, the second half of open discussion, John, go for it.
okay, thank you, Justin. So, first one is the hero's mother is a virgin. We can agree about that, right?
Sure.
Okay, his father is a king or an heir of a king, and this one, the king version would be God the Father, right, King of heaven and everything like that, or an heir of a king, which would be Joseph, if you wanted to take a very literal sort of sense in that Joseph was his father. He would have been like a son of David, right?
Sure.
Okay, the circumstances of his conception are unusual.
Sure. I mean,
Okay.
I think that goes along with his being a virgin. So I think you've double counted here.
Well, no. So no.
If he was born of a virgin, that's an unusual circumstance of his conception.
Yes, that would be unusual, but that's not considered part of his unusual conception. The unusual part of the conception is that Mary was raped by Gabriel and the Holy Spirit.
So she wasn't a virgin. So Jesus wasn't born of a virgin.
No. She was a virgin. She was a virgin, raped. I'm using a very specific definition of rape that doesn't exactly require penetration, right? So she was impregnated regardless, right?
Yeah, but so she was impregnated. I mean, like, now we're talking about the semantics of words here, but like you're trying to count evidence, right?
Well,
and
no,
so, like,
I'm trying. Well, no, what I'm trying to do.
These categories.
So I've taken it as you being like, this is a specious list that is analogous to young Earth creationists trying to say that nature is like a watch, right? And I'm trying to show you that Jesus matches, especially in Matthew, most of these points here. That's all that I'm trying to do, right? You want to be pedantic and count that, say that this is double counting? Fine. Yeah, we don't even have to count that one.
But that last point you made matters a great deal here, because what you are doing is exactly what the creationist does with living organisms when they say that, like,
how?
Look, it has these features of designed objects: complexity, functionality, delicacy, and it meets all these other criteria of things from our sample size that are designed. Therefore, these living organisms are also probably designed. And
no. So where am I coming to? No, Ben. Where am I coming to a conclusion by just saying that Jesus is a rank Raglan classical hero?
When
am
you
I
say
coming to a conclusion there?
Yes. When you say that the a fortiori probability is higher, you have to be saying in some way that this criteria favors your hypothesis, otherwise it's irrelevant.
This is the prior likelihood, which is before the conclusion.
Yeah, so you admit that, so using prior likelihood is the conclusion.
No. The conclusion is what you get after you consider the evidence. The prior likelihood is just the first step in investigating and getting to the conclusion. I have not made a conclusion by stating that Jesus is a rank Raglan hero type, right?
So the creationists can do the same thing. The creationists can do the exact same thing and say, look, before I even look at evidence, I look at, this is what they say, like finding a watch on a heath. When I look
You're
at
desperately trying to make me into a young Earth creationist. That's
not at all.
I feel like
not
that's all
all.
this is.
No, not at all. I'm trying to help you see the similarity between the patterns of argument and the reasons why you reject the patterns of argument in the creationist account are the exact same reasons why the relevant consensus of scholars and historians reject the mythicist argument.
I don't think that you can actually. I don't think that you can actually communicate to me in a steelman way what their actual position is. Like, why do they reject the minimal mythicist position?
Because this is great. So I would love to do this right here. I would love to meet this challenge. So the actual historian who is part of the rank and file consensus of the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis says that there's two hypotheses: apocalyptic prophet, mythical figure. The contention is by them that the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis better explains, it's more parsimonious, has more explanatory power, is the widest explanatory scope, and is most coherent with our background knowledge. And that it explains things like crucifixion by Roman authorities, the content of Jesus' radical ethical message, the temple incident, Paul's silence on biographical details, the emergence of the post-crucifixion movement, the immediate Jewish context of the time and location. So
No,
that's
okay,
what
okay,
those
okay. Hold on,
scholars are going to appeal to.
Ben. You're steamrolling me right now. Okay, can we please stop doing that?
Okay.
Okay, let's go back to your list. Okay, can you start from the top of your list there? What exactly do you think? Like, because I know that you mentioned the temple, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's fiction, so we can cross that off.
Well, no. Like, what do you mean it's fiction? So that's what you have to argue. Like, we can't just take that.
Right.
Like, we can't just you can't just suppose that it's fiction. That's what you have to argue.
Okay, yeah. So I can actually argue this. So when the temple thing actually happens, there's a bunch of different things that you can actually look at. First of all, it is encased in what's that wrapping thing that they do. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it starts out the pattern is it starts out with one thing, it encases a separate thing, and then it comes back to the one thing, right? So the thing that comes before it is Jesus crazily yells at that bush. He crazy yells, at the what is it called? Fuck. It's not the date bush. Anyways, fig tree. He crazily yells at the fig tree. Okay, right? Then he goes in and he has a shit fit in the temple. Okay, temple shit fit. Okay, now that right there, and then when he comes back out, okay, it's crazy yell at the fig tree. Okay, so that's the pericope, right? If you can see on the screen right here, crazy, and then there's temple where he's even more crazy, or well, he goes crazy there, and then he's crazy again at the fig tree. Okay, so this right here is typological of mythology and fiction, right? It's trying to tell a story, and the story is the fig tree represents the Jewish orthodoxy at that time, the Jewish leaders and everything like that. He goes to the temple and exposes their corruption, turning over tables and everything like that, condemning the current Jewish practices and the current Jewish orthodoxy. And then he comes back out and he notices after destroying what was in the temple, the fig tree is also unable to bear any kind of fruit or anything like that, therefore destroying the fig tree, right? So all of this is encased in order to tell a theological point. And that occurs right there. Then another leg of this, right, is that when it's told in, I believe, John, it actually gets transported in time because John has a 3-year ministry, whereas the synoptics only have like 1 season of a ministry, right? So they actually transport this from the beginning of his ministry over there. In one of them, it's at the beginning. In the other one, it's at the very end, right? So this is very typological of fiction. So the temple is a total fiction. We don't have any evidence of that. Paul never mentions it happening. Paul doesn't mention anything from Jesus's actual life or anything like that. So that's a fiction.
So I think we find the temple incident in across multiple gospels of the synoptic gospels, and so the one hypothesis is
they're copied. It's called copying.
So the there is some independence between the stories that we have of them. Yes, there's copying.
No, we
that
don't.
goes on. Sure.
Well, okay. So hold on. Hold on. Let me correct myself.
Well, no. It's not. No. I gave you an opportunity to talk just now, so I think it's my turn to respond, and then you can come back and respond to it when I'm finished. So, the hypothesis for the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis is that all that data we find across the Gospels for the temple incident, that this was a central provocative act of an apocalyptic prophet, a piece of street theater, symbolically enacting the temple's imminent destruction. It provides the immediate cause for Jesus's arrest. And the competing hypothesis, the one that you were just arguing for, is that this was a later invention to add detail to the earthly allegory. But most historians are going to say that this is an odd invention. It's a specific political act with specific historical consequences. It's just too earthly and politically charged for a celestial allegory. So the most historians are going to say that the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis is more powerful and it's simpler, where the mythical hypothesis is weaker and problematic. The apocalyptic prophet hypothesis specifically has superior scope and power. It integrates the incident perfectly
not.
into the narrative arc. But for the mythicist hypothesis, the event is an inconveniently specific detail that doesn't fit the celestial model. And so this is where I think that the philosophy of science becomes very important, because what the historian is going to do is they're going to appeal to
So it's
power
just like
and
steamroll
simplicity.
time. Is that it? You're going to make a point, and then you're just going to keep on making a point, and you're just going to keep on talking and talking. You're going to run out the time. Is that your
Well,
tactic
I
here?
gave you some time to lay out your case, and so now I'm laying out my case in
Well,
response.
yeah, and your case
and
is
I
built
stayed
upon
with
sand.
okay, but that's
Your entire
now's your
case is
chance
built
to
upon
argue
sand.
that. But now
Right,
that's
and I
your
can.
now's your okay. Well then, please by all means continue.
Yeah. So your underlying assumption here is that the temple is independently attested, but we don't actually have that. In fact, all of the gospels actually ultimately depend on Paul, and Paul never mentions it. Right. So Mark first is the one to invent it. If I'm correct about that, Mark's the first one to invent it, and then the other gospels copy it. Right. That's not part of the independent. That's not part of the unique information from Matthew or Luke.
So again, I think this is where the philosophy of science comes in, because your hypothesis is that it was invented and that it was copied, and so therefore it doesn't have any historical.
Are you
import.
denying that Matthew copied from Mark and Luke copied from both Matthew and Mark?
I'm not denying that the copying happened across the Gospels. Obviously, I'm not denying.
Okay.
What I am
So
denying is
good.
that we
So now
find the
establish
temple- what I
now
what I'm-
establish the independence.
What I'm saying is that we find the temple story across multiple gospels, and that the
Because they're
hypothesis that
copied.
and the best hypothesis
Is
the
that they're
best
copied?
So I just, most historians and myself would just disagree with on you, because by you still saying it, all you're saying is that it was a later invention to add detail to the earthly allegory. But that's the very thing that the historian is going to find as an odd invention. Again, it's a specific political act with specific historical consequences. And it appears too earthy and politically charged to fit in that simple allegorical model. Whereas the apocalyptic prophet model says that no, this was a central provocative act of an apocalyptic prophet that they're reporting, a piece of street theater, and symbolically enacting the temple's imminent destruction. And so it provides an immediate cause for why those authors would include that event in their gospel, or would copy it from another one, because they believed that this event happened. And it would explain why Jesus then got arrested.
Well, okay, so it does provide the explanation for Jesus being arrested, but I mean, and that's even if the temple was like the reason.
That's the coherence of fit that I'm talking about.
Like, why? No, hold on. What in the Gospels? Why? And I can double check this. I might be wrong, but in the Gospels, was it not the Sanhedrin that pressured the Romans to arrest Jesus?
Sure. Let's say that it is.
Okay. And who why would the Romans care about some Jew going crazy in a Jewish temple?
Because it was a provocative act that undermined
against the Orthodoxy.
The Roman authority too, saying
no, it undermined the Orthodoxy authority. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. The Roman. It's not like Jesus. It's not like Jesus went into like a Roman court of law and started flipping over tables there, complaining about shit, right? He went into an Orthodox temple where they were selling shit, and so he wanted to make a statement, and so he started flipping tables, right?
Yeah, but what was the statement that he was making? That the kingdom of God was coming in to overthrow the current rule, the Roman government that Jesus was saying was the devil and his cohorts.
Why are you inserting the Roman government here? It seems like you're needlessly inserting the Roman government, but also I've already explained to you the theological necessity of this story.
Well, we're talking about why he was arrested. We're talking about why he was arrested.
Regardless of why he was arrested, right? The temple the temple incident exists to tell a theological narrative that Jesus is coming to disrupt the orthodoxy, to disrupt the current covenant, right? And bring a new covenant. He's going to destroy the old covenant. He destroys it here at the temple, and he curses it up here, and it gets destroyed down here. Like this is theology. This is not history.
So, but the historical hypothesis is that the reason why this was recorded in the Gospels as it was is because it was the actions of street theater. That was a provocative act, and that explains within the Jewish tradition, which is coherent.
Sorry, you just keep ad hoc stating and making claims instead of actually providing evidence. Like right now, you saying that the temple was like street theater.
This is where the philosophy of science becomes super important, because both of us are stating our hypotheses. And then we're saying that those hypotheses are confirmed by certain evidences that we observe in history, that we find the temple incident across multiple gospels, that we find a crucifixion by Roman authorities.
Why are you ignoring the fact that I've already explained this through copying? This temple scene is not part of the unique parts of Matthew or Luke.
So let's try your reply that you just gave to my hypothesis, where I say, no, you're not giving any evidence of that. You're just restating your hypothesis. Is that a valid reply? I mean, you're saying that this was
it's not a valid reply because I've given it's not a valid reply from you because I've given my evidence for that.
No, right? You've restated your hypothesis that it was a mythical invention that was copied by each author.
No, a mythical invention. No. It's a theological invention that was needed in order to tell a theological story, in Mark, right? And then others copied that. And that's just fact. Like the fact that Matthew copied Mark, Luke copied both Matthew and Mark, right? So like all of that's known. And then with Mark being the first one to write it, and there's more of a theological need to write it than like any kind of practical need to write it. We don't have any source information for Mark's information, right? So we don't know if he got this independently. We don't know if it actually tracks the history. So there's no way that we can say that it actually is sourced in history. So we also know that people make shit up. There's a longer ending to Mark that was just made up and put in there in the 2nd century. So we know that people were making this up. Even in the 2nd century, people were just making shit up. That is a viable a hypothesis right there, right? Now,
so when you say it's a viable hypothesis, when you say it's a viable hypothesis, okay, there's potential explanations on the table, but the question is, what is the actual explanation? For that, we have to make an inference to the best explanation, an explanatory inference. And so that's where the historians, the consensus of historians, are going to come in and say the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis has more power, and is simpler, more parsimonious than the mythic hypothesis. And this is one data specifically that they're going to give is the Jewish temple. In the sense that
so dogmatic people are going to do that, but
it provides
I feel like you don't know what
cause for his arrest, and
you don't know what
symbolically enacting the
means.
temple's immediate. I would disagree with you on that, since I have absolutely. I'm the philosopher of science, so now you're in my wheelhouse.
Okay, so right. So let me lay this out real quick, okay? Let me lay this out real quick, okay? I have sourced all of my hypothesis in Jewish literature, in Jewish culture, in the Mediterranean culture, in the Hellenistic culture, in which all of this has been brought up in. Every single point in my opening statement is sourced to real historical things that we know about history, right? All you have done is just ad hoc state this apocalyptic prophet, and then you've just ad hoc stated that this is independent information contained in all 3 gospels that are not copied. It seems like that's what you're saying. They're not copied. They're independently sourced from eyewitness testimony. And all of these are just ad hoc claims. So as far as simpler goes, my hypothesis is actually simpler because I can actively trace, like in a requirements matrix, since we're both engineers, in like a requirements matrix, I can trace every single one of my points to a real actionable and understood point of information in that culture, in that time, at that point, right? I can trace it directly there. Where can you do that for yours?
So first off, there's two kinds of simplicity. So the first is often called parsimony, and the second is often called elegance or sometimes coherence. That depends on whether it's internal or external coherence. So parsimonious is to do with the number or the modesty of the hypothesis, how much it asserts. So at the beginning of your opening statement, you said that minimal mythicism is defined by 5 propositions. Okay, so you make 5 essential claims. My hypothesis makes 1. Jesus existed as an apocalyptic prophet. That's it.
Yeah. So it should be easy for you to prove that.
So my hypothesis is more parsimonious than yours in the sense that it doesn't assert as much. So it has fewer ways of being false.
No. That's a misunderstanding there, because it like as long as each one of my hold on. Each one of my points is sourced in information that we currently have in evidence, right? So each one of those is sourced in evidence. So it doesn't matter how many points I have that are directly sourced in evidence. What matters is how many points do I have that's not sourced in evidence? How many ad hoc claims am I making? What ad hoc claims have you parsed out from my list of 5? You want me to read
Jesus
them off
is
again?
was later given an allegorical earthly story. Jesus originated as a celestial deity and was later given an allegorical earthly story. That's it.
Right. No, that's actually true, because Paul doesn't relay any kind of earthly story in our earliest evidence of this Christ figure, this Jesus Christ figure. What we have is just an angelic figure that's not based in history. We have a later allegorical earthly stories that are then told about him, similar to the ways that Isis and Osiris, a mystery cult, operates, because all mystery cults operated that way.
So now, you're going outside of the Jewish context to compare it to Osiris and these other figures.
It's still in the Jewish Christian context.
We talked about elegance. So there was 2 features, parsimony and elegance. So elegance being the feature of which the internal or external coherence. My hypothesis is entirely within the Jewish tradition that we find at the time and place these events are being.
How is mine not?
I don't have to, because you have to go out to make outside of it to make all of these claims, the analogies that you're making with your claims, and you're saying that they borrowed these things from other external sources.
So they were influenced by them. The Hebrew Bible was already influenced by Zoroastrianism with the bodily resurrections and Ezekiel.
You have to go to like Platonic sources in order to get
Platonic sources. No, I just went to no. Did you not? I'm sorry, Ben. Did you not just hear me? I just went to a Jewish source, Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 37.
Yeah, but your whole hypothesis has to go well outside of that Jewish tradition.
So you think Christianity existed in a vacuum?
Assumptions.
So you think Christianity existed in a vacuum? It grew up in a vacuum. It was unaffected by the culture that it existed and grew up in.
I'm obviously not saying that Christianity existed in a vacuum.
That's exactly what you're saying.
Then you're strawmanning me. So the only thing that I'm saying here is that the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis is found entirely within the existing Jewish tradition of the time. You don't have to go to any external sources outside of that tradition to get the content of the hypothesis. When you take content outside of that tradition, those are auxiliary assumptions that require some sort of independent evidence or motivation. That's exactly what you don't have. That's why it's an ad hoc auxiliary assumption,
It
and that's
is
why it's
not an
less.
ad
And that's
hoc.
why it's
I
less
get
elegant.
why you have to make it ad hoc, but it is definitely not ad hoc. It's not ad hoc to say that that Judaism was affected by the Hellenistic culture and that they were busy syncretizing things. And you want me to source this in reality for you?
Would the consensus
Can I source
of
this in
modern
reality for you?
scholars, religious
Can I source this
and
in reality for
non-religious
you?
scholars, agree with that statement, or would they agree with what I just
source this
said
in reality for you?
about the elegance of the hypothesis? I would like.
Well, no, about how my presentation is actually in the Jewish context. Can I do that for you?
Sure, go ahead.
If I do that for you, is that actually going to suffice for you?
I'm only going to raise the question: is that what the relevant consensus of religious and non-religious scholars would accept? Could you convince
An appeal
them
to authority.
with
I'm not
that?
going to accept appeals to authority.
Could you convince the relevant scholars of that? Would you make that argument and convince
Okay,
any of those
so
scholars?
I don't have. It doesn't matter if I convince scholars or not. All it
I
matters
think it does.
is if my
I think there's reasons
hold on,
why
Ben.
it wouldn't.
Ben, listen to me, okay? All I have to do is make a coherent, sound, logical argument that is explained by the evidence, that is found in the evidence. Like right now, what I have to do and I have to show you is that Judaism was in the midst of being syncretized with the larger Hellenistic culture, right? That's all I have to do. Now, I'm about to ask you a list of characteristics, and I want you to tell me if it sounds like Jesus or not, okay? Is he a firstborn son of God?
Sure.
Is he God's agent of creation?
I don't know. What do we mean by agent of creation? What did Jesus create?
Is he claimed to be God's agent of creation?
That's just restating the statement that I don't understand what it means.
Okay, Paul. So Paul claims no. Paul says, and I can bring up the scripture if you want me to. Paul says
Sure.
that Jesus is God's agent of creation.
I don't.
Is Jesus considered God's celestial high priest?
Sure.
Okay. Is he considered the image of God?
Yes. Everyone's considered the image of God. So that's
Right.
either evidence for everything or for nothing.
Well, so Justin, I know time's up, but let me just finish this real quick, okay? And then is he a spiritual counterpart to Adam?
Sure, everyone's a spiritual counterpart to Adam.
No, in a very direct sense. Anyways, so this is actually Philo of Alexandria describing his logos figure that is a Hellenistic syncretization between Jewish ideas and Jewish angelology and the wider Hellenistic culture. So Philo of Alexandria is the evidence that you're looking for. My points here in every single part is sourced in both the Jewish culture that it came from, right? As well as the Hellenistic culture that affected it, right? To act like the Hellenistic culture had no effect on Christianity is ignoring information. And I got to tell you, Ben, that's what young earth creationists do.
I'll allow you a couple seconds to respond, Ben, and then that's the end of our open discussion.
I started off the open discussion, and so it's probably, in all fairness, to give the last word to John.
Well, John's going to have the last closing statement anyways, but that's fine. All right, so that's the end of our standard time for this debate. We do have 2 5-minute closings to go through first. Again, just want to thank everyone so much for showing up and watching this debate and participating in the chat and for hitting those like buttons. Skeptic Haven is like just a sliver away from 4,000 subs, and it's been growing pretty quickly, and we're really, really happy for all of those things. If you're watching this after the live, make sure to put your opinions down below in the comments. Okay. So with that, we got some 5-minute closings here. Let me reset my clock. And Ben, the floor is all yours.
All right. So let me try to kind of summarize the case for a apocalyptic prophet hypothesis that I made tonight. So what I wanted to start off with had to do with the philosophy of science and what it is to be an inference to the best explanation. So, the best explanation is the one that explains the most while assuming the least. So, by explaining the most, it's the hypothesis with the most explanatory power and explanatory scope. And by assuming the least, I mean it's the most parsimonious explanation or the most elegant, or if you prefer the term, it's the simplest hypothesis. And so my contention tonight is that there are multiple lines of evidence that the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis best explains, and that it's because of those four explanatory virtues that I mentioned that the consensus is what it is. And so the first is going to be the crucifixion by the Roman authorities. So um, the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis is both powerful and simple. It's a provocative Jewish preacher who announced a rival kingdom of God and symbolically attacked the temple's authority during a volatile festival. And his execution for sedition is the expected outcome. And so the alternative mythicist hypothesis is weaker and more complex. Celestial beings, passion in the heavens was later turned into an allegory, but this allegory, for unexplained reasons, involved the most shameful and theologically problematic form of execution possible at the hands of a specific earthly governor. Um, and another line of evidence would be the radical ethics, the content of the radical ethics of Jesus. So the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis is both powerful and simple. If you believe the world is ending imminently, then renouncing wealth, property, and even familial ties is a severe but perfectly rational preparation for the New World Order. And so the ethics are a direct consequence of that worldview. But by contrast, the mythicist hypothesis is weak and vague. These ethics were part of an allegory, but why these specific socially disruptive ethics? Were they borrowed from Cynic philosophers? If so, why were they so tightly fused with Jewish apocalyptic expectation? The connection here, again, is just unclear. We mentioned the temple incident. It was, a simple provocative act, a piece of street theater of the temple's imminent destruction, and it provides an immediate cause for his arrest. And I argued that the mythicist hypothesis was weak and problematic. This must be some later invention that's copied over and over again to add to the earthly allegory, but it's an odd invention. You know, it's too earthy and politically charged for a simple celestial allegory. Um, John mentioned Paul's silence on the biographical details, but I have a powerful and simple explanation of that. Paul wasn't writing biographies. He's writing urgent theological letters to communities that already knew the basic story. He focused on the crucifixion and the resurrection because those were the key events for the apocalypticist. And so John might have a simple explanation for that too, but it's also problematic. Paul um, does mention a descendant of David and that Jesus was born of a woman. It can also explain the emergence of the post crucifixion movement and the immediate Jewish context that we find the stories in. So, again, powerful and coherent apocalyptic hypothesis, the worldview, followers, apocalyptic worldview provided a specific theological tool, resurrection of the righteous martyr, to process the catastrophe of the crucifixion and conclude that Jesus had vindicated, that God had Jesus vindicated God. But the alternative explanation is weak and disconnected. A group of followers had a revelation about celestial being, and later, for separate reasons, they decided to historize him. There's no clear causal link explaining why the death of a man would trigger a belief in a celestial being's triumph. And so I think my John's hypothesis is a theory of 1,000 qualifications. Um, to explain things like the crucifixion, it needs an ad hoc theory of allegory. To explain the ethics, it needs to borrow from Greek philosophy. To explain Paul, it requires, some strained linguistic interpretation. I think ultimately it's a model that creates more puzzles than it solves. And so
All right, Ben.
that's why the scholarly consensus rejects it.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, last call for anyone who's got questions, just at Yahooligan in the chat. If you have a question for our debaters, we'll be going over those questions right after John finishes his closing, which, John, you may do so now.
All right. So I find that Ben's position is just full of ad hoc assumptions. He starts off with ad hoc assumptions about what kind of apocalyptic, kind of figure, being the apocalyptic preacher model that most historians agree to, or something like that, which is not actually. I covered that. That's not actually what they would agree to. A majority of New Testament scholars would agree to the magical form of Jesus in that particular way. So I do feel like Ben has a number of ad hoc assumptions. He's got the ad hoc assumption that there's independent information in the Gospels, for which he provided no methodology for actually discerning any kind of independent information. He just merely asserted that there was independent information, and he did that via an argument from authority. And my position, on the other hand, is supported by evidence at every single turn. Every single one of my 5 points is rooted in actual evidence that we have. And then right here at the end, in his closing statement, he brought up a number of points that we could have talked about in our discussion, but I guess he chose to bring them up here at the end. I don't know if maybe he thought that I couldn't actually handle them, or I didn't give me enough time to handle them, so he wanted to sneak them in or something like that. I'm not exactly sure why Ben would do that, but like the born of a woman thing, Paul definitely mentions being made of a woman and made in the flesh, just like Hebrews talks about Jesus being made in the flesh. So born of a woman is specifically mentioned in Job, and it uses genao of a woman, whereas Paul specifically chose a construction that meant made, genomai of a woman. And he would have known this particular aspect of it, and he specifically chose to use genomai, so much so that Bart Ehrman notates that later Christians actually changed genomai to genao to make it more specific. So they knew that there was a problem with it. This was one of those things that that they were embarrassed by the fact that Paul used genomai and not genao. And then he talked about the crucifixion. Now the crucifixion, or the staros, that Paul mentions is not specific to Roman crucifixion, and that's something that was invented for the Gospels. What Paul mentions is just a cross, right? Which could have just been a pole, because crucifixion was actually a different. It was a whole system of different kind of torture and unalivement. And torture and death practices there. Ben, throughout all of this, has failed to lay out a methodology for discerning historical facts about Jesus. He's merely just asserted that an apocalyptic preacher would have been the most likely one, and then just goes ahead and assumes that it's the most likely one, because that is the kind of figure that he can whittle down all of the New Testament scholars into at least agreeing that that one existed, or at least by his own summation, that's what he thinks. Ben merely just appealed to the scholars and appealed to ad hoc statements. Like the temple scene is actually historical because it's recorded in 3 copies of one gospel. One gospel, by the way, that's actually dependent upon Paul. There are multiple different ways in which we can prove a Pauline connection to Mark, making Mark just a Pauline gospel. So ultimately, all of the evidence stems from Paul and his beliefs. And what does Paul say? Well, in Galatians 1:11 through 12, Paul says that he did not get his information from any man on earth. He got it through revelation. And then later on in Romans, he specifies that revelation and scripture are the places that he gets it. In 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8, he reveals that he only knows about Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection because of the scriptures. So if everything is based on Paul, then we have nothing to historically ground an apocalyptic preacher figure. And then he Curiously enough, Ben has spent this entire debate discussing the philosophy of science and trying to paint the mythicist corner in this light of young earth creationism. And here's what I find with young earth creationists. Young earth creationists make specious claims. They make ad hoc statements. They disregard evidence. And we have seen Ben do that at every single turn tonight. He's made specious arguments about some apocalyptic preacher and who apologists claim, or sorry, New Testament scholars claim to have existed, right? Totally disregarding the fact that they only would accept a magical form of Jesus, and only the critical New Testament scholars, a much smaller group, would have pared down to what he was suggesting there. Then we find him rejecting and disavowing the Hellenistic connection to Judaism and the Christian movement at that time, even though I demonstrated to him that the Jews through Philo was busy syncretizing Judaism with Hellenistic culture.
All right, thank you, John. Okay, so it is everyone's favorite time of the debate, where I talk really slowly so that I can organize the questions I received before I ask them. Okay. Right, so it's not too late. If you have a question, at Yahooligan, if you can. I realize some of you are probably watching on mobile or whatever. Just put Yahoo or something in the question, and I'll see it. My eye will catch it. So with that, I'll just start with the one and only super chat we got all day, or now we got a second one now, but oh no, so they're just putting the one on the screen now, the same one we got. So we'll start with this actual super chat that we got. Not really a question. So we got InfiDale 3476 499. I love Ben, but I can't understand him when I'm not high. So I mean, it's Friday night. If you're not high, you're doing Friday wrong. You're just not.
Take that, John.
Yeah.
I live in Canada, so I can tell you guys as soon as this debate is done, I'm going for a snack myself. All right. So I not only did I get some questions from people directly, but I also just lifted some questions from the chat because I thought they were kind of interesting. So I have a question here from at Mike Lunkins. It said, Ehrman says Paul believed Jesus Christ existed. Did Paul actually believe or just assume? Because he kept hearing stories about the guy. So I'd like to hear that question answered by both of you. I'll start with John.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so Ehrman said Paul believed Jesus Christ existed. Did Paul actually believe or just assume because he kept hearing stories about the guy?
Oh, well, so what we have in evidence is that Paul communicates that he received revelation from Jesus. Now, it's very obvious through his writings that he believed in a very fleshly Jesus, like one made of flesh and blood. But the fact of the matter is that he only received revelation and he read scripture about the Messiah, right? So if Paul would have gotten his information from any historical person or human person, then that would have been seen as corrupted and not trustworthy. So Paul had to get his information either through revelation or through God's word, the scriptures.
Thanks, John. Ben, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I think that Bart Ehrman thinks the way that he does because Bart Ehrman accepts the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis like I do, whereas the mythicist hypothesis is going to say something different. So the answer to the question is going to depend on which hypothesis you end up accepting and the reasons why you accept it. And so I don't want to speak for Bart Ehrman, but I suspect that he does think that Jesus existed, and he thinks that because of the things that he says. He talks about the crucifixion, and so he talks about Jesus being crucified because he believes Jesus was actually crucified, like existed and was arrested and existed and crucified. He says that he's a descendant of David and that he was born of a woman. And so, these are things that you would say about someone you think is you think exists, and that he knew people like Peter, and that who also knew Jesus, and so the best explanation is what Bart would say is that there was an apocalyptic prophet that Paul didn't just assume existed, but believed existed.
So
right.
the only thing that I'll add to that is that it matters where that information comes from and how you're sourcing that information, because I feel like the strength of my position is that I can source all of my points that I made in actual scripture. I can source them in Paul's words, and I don't have to do eisegesis and force an understanding upon the text, right? All I have to do is exegesis, and that's just pull the information out of the text. I feel like in order to make all of the positions that Bart Ehrman does, he has to put things onto the text. He has to assume that Paul got information from earthly people, despite the fact that he says that he didn't, right? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. What's important is what's in evidence. And what is in evidence is that Paul only received revelation and he read the scripture. That's the important part. And I would love to hear anybody try to tell me where any of the things that Ben just claimed are found in evidence. And I think that that's the big defining factor there.
Okay. So the next question I have, I've got two questions from two people incredibly similar. So I'll read them both, and then Ben, I'll give you first crack this time. Okay. So from Inquiry 20 asks, Inquiry 20 asks, what would change your mind? A book, a person you trust, a consensus, and what would that look like? And then Mark Reed from Mark Reed Atheism asks, what would be necessary to convince either debater of the opposite position? So, yeah, Ben, so what would it take?
Oh, I think this is a fantastic question. So, there's at least two things that I think would convince me. So the first is additional evidence. So if historians were to go out and do more history and uncover other documents that we didn't have, and we were to then update our hypotheses on this new evidence, that's something that could certainly change my mind. And the second thing that could change my mind is that history is provisional. So that someone might come along and find a new way of fitting all these pieces together in a way that has the best balance of those explanatory virtues that I mentioned, things like explanatory power, scope, parsimony, elegance. And so if they were to produce that, I think that would convince me and other historians, and that the consensus would change, what we call in philosophy of science a paradigm shift in the consensus. And to my mind, that would be quite exciting. And I would welcome something like that movement in thought. I hope I get to experience for a paradigm shift in one of the sciences in my lifetime.
All right. Same question, John.
So, considering that the actual historicist claim is that the Christian mystery cult that emerged in the first century was the super special mystery cult out there that had a historical figure, that is going to require really good evidence. And so that is what would cause me to change my position, is if you provide enough evidence, we found some new piece of evidence that is so strong on historicism that it overcomes that prior likelihood, that is what would convince me.
All right. Thank you so much. Next question from Storytime Jesus. What does made of a woman do for the argument for myth? Weren't mythological or mythical figures mythically born of a woman? Sorry, I'll try that one again, and so that it's more clear. What does made of a woman do for the argument for myth? Weren't mythical figures mythically born of a woman?
Well,
We'll go, I think that's for John. So yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, I mean, they were magically born of women, which is kind of the point there. But the whole made of a woman, right, is supposed to communicate that that Jesus was, made in flesh, right? So, there's a certain pesherim in that could be read out of, I believe it's like 2 Samuel. Can't remember the exact verses. I can pull them up if need be. But in 2 Samuel, there's a set of verses where God effectively tells David that he will basically retrieve his seed from him and then raise him up in an eternal kingdom afterwards, right? So there's an easy pesherim that could be read and understood by Paul that Jesus was made in Davidic flesh, and that's what the made of a woman is supposed to be about. The of a woman part is very important in this respect because it's supposed to be sinful flesh. They regularly in Jewish theology, because I source all my information within the context and shit. In Jewish theology, the fact that people are born from women is how sin is transferred, right? That's the reason why you're sinful, being born of a woman, being born of that process, right? And so being born of a woman is meant to convey that they were born in sinful flesh, or they were made in sinful flesh. And that was a key aspect to the theology, even in Paul's time, because as he explains in Galatians 4:4, it's very important for Jesus to be made in sinful flesh so that that sinful flesh can be defeated or killed, right? And then resurrected in a perfect body. Now, this perfect body is also made by God, but not in sinful flesh. It's perfect flesh, right? So like, and that's how our future resurrection bodies are crafted. They're crafted directly by God, and Paul uses the exact same verbiage that he does for Jesus's sinful body.
All right. Thanks, John. Ben, you're welcome to add on or reply if you like.
So I would just point that I think that those passages from Paul are what kind of make the mythicist hypothesis a little bit awkward and problematic when compared to the apocalyptic prophet hypothesis. So on that hypothesis, there was a historical figure, Jesus, who Paul believed was a descendant of David and was born of a woman and was crucified and died. That it's just expected if he would use that sort of language. And that it seems like an awful complicated layer, less elegant hypothesis to add all this other stuff onto what Paul might have meant when we can just. I think there's just a more parsimonious explanation with more explanatory power on offer.
If I can provide some context here, the thing that the thing that Ben is forgetting is that I am just drawing off what the words Paul uses means, right? So Paul uses specific words. Those specific words have meanings. And the fact that genao is indicative of a regular human birth, and that's the word that Paul does not use, that is what needs to be explained. On my analysis of this, it is not strained because I'm just going by what the words that Paul uses means. Words mean words. And so if we are going to sit there and say words don't mean words, then that needs an explanation. And that's exactly why Ben's position is not parsimonious, because he needs to be able to explain why Paul chose those words when he knew what the actual idiom was. Paul knew the Old Testament Septuagint, right? He knew that in Job, it used genao of a woman, but he specifically chose genomai, so much so that later scribes changed all of these references to be genao from genomai. So like, those are the things that need to be explained and are not explained on Bart Ehrman's view or on this apocalyptic prophet view.
All right, thank you. Next question I just lifted straight from the chat because I thought it was interesting. So at C7A1, history shows Jesus was real and he was crucified. Why else would Christians be hated through Rome and all the graffiti and with insults? Why would people choose to be persecuted? I think it's a fascinating question. So I lifted it, and I'll pose it with John first.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that this is, really affecting like the truth of the matter. These things are going to be coming much, much later when the religion was at least established enough to where they had churches and everything, right? So you've got Paul in the 50s who was persecuting Christians and whatnot, but it was a Jew persecuting just another sect of Jews. Right. And so it wasn't like Rome and all this other stuff. But even so, that doesn't affect the fact that people were convinced by the theology. And that's exactly, even in the 2nd century with, church fathers like Justin Martyr, they didn't care about the historical nature of it. They just cared about the theology, like whether or not the theological truth is convincing to them. And so I don't think that this aspect actually touches on what actually happened. It just touches on like a belief in it happening. And also I would point out that other cult groups were also similarly persecuted at the time by the Romans as well as other groups.
All right. Yeah, Ben, you want anything you want to add to it?
Yeah, so this is often called, well, scholars like to fix little nicknames to stuff, and so this is often referred to as the criterion of embarrassment. It seems like their Messiah being crucified in a violent way just isn't something that they would have made up as part of their story or their religion or something that they were willing to die for, but instead was an event that happened, and then they had to kind of rationalize that into the story, work it in, and so that they wouldn't have just invented it whole cloth as part of the theological narrative that they were putting forward, unless they had to deal with it. It was just something that was an event that happened, and it was widely known to have happened, and so that they couldn't just change the events of it. So that was a reason to think that there was a historical figure, an apocalyptic prophet that was actually crucified, and other things, kind of going along with this. The Jewish authorities at the time went around saying that the body was stolen, and so by the enemies of Jesus are saying that the body's stolen because they believe that he was a real person that was actually crucified, and that there really was an empty tomb, and that they had to explain these facts, and so that's why they went with this story of disciples stole, or someone stole the body, because these are just events that had happened, and so that these people had the simplest and the most parsimonious explanation is that these events did happen.
So if I can dialogue with Ben real quick,
Sure.
Ben, would you be in agreement with the apologists out there that the criterion of embarrassment applied to the women finding the tomb empty is valid?
I mean, sure. So, like, when you say valid, I just assume you mean it's a possible explanation, and that there's still a question
what I'm
of
saying is
whether
that
it's
it's the
actually
best. No, I'm saying that it's the best explanation for the empty tomb.
that the criterion of embarrassment is that they wouldn't have invented women to come find the empty tomb.
Right. And so the women found the empty tomb, so therefore there was an empty tomb.
I don't think that's a good reason to think that there was an empty tomb. I'm of the how well did they keep track of what people had been killed and what tomb they were put in? Like, I don't know how we rule out the hypothesis that they went to the wrong tomb, and that it was women who discovered the tomb is really neither here nor there. But that's my own opinion, and I'm not a historian, so I, could very well have the wrong opinion of that, but I'm not so sure. I believe that they found a tomb that they knew was Jesus, and there was no body in it. That they could have just gone to the
Right.
wrong tomb. whoever it was. But I don't know.
So
'Cause,
so you
different,
disagree.
different gospels give different accounts. So that's,
So why do you
that's another
disagree
problem.
with critical? Why do you disagree with critical scholars on this?
Do I disagree with all critical scholars on this? So,
Well,
so
I didn't
what I'm
say
getting-
all critical scholars. I just said critical scholars, and by critical scholars, like I think Bart Ehrman is pretty much representative of this. In that Bart.
So
Ehrman
I'm getting
believes
this
that
from Bart Ehrman.
you're not getting an empty tomb from Bart Ehrman.
Well, I'm saying that there's reasons to be skeptical that there was an empty tomb. For if I'm remembering
No,
what I've
Bart-
read of Bart. So
No,
Bart
no.
Ehrman does accept that there was an empty tomb, and that he accepts this on the ground for the criterion of embarrassment.
No,
Okay.
no. Bart Ehrman says that Jesus was most likely thrown into an open grave, like a
Yeah.
collection of
So,
bodies.
and I don't have good grounds to disagree with Bart Ehrman.
I like how in the span of 2 minutes I was able to get you to reverse your opinion. Just by mentioning that a scholar would disagree with you on it, you're immediately turning.
What did my opinion change from what to what?
Your opinion changed from the best explanation is there's an empty tomb to, oh, okay, Bart Ehrman says there's an open grave, so there's an open
So I
grave.
believe that I started this off by saying that I'm not convinced that there was some empty tomb. In the sense of that there was a tomb that they went to that they knew was Jesus's, and that tomb was very could have been that he was buried in a mass grave, like Bart Ehrman says, and that those women, if there were women that went and found the tomb, found the wrong tomb. They went to a tomb that they thought Jesus was buried in, but there was no one buried in. I'm not entirely sure because I'm getting this idea from things that I've read from other scholars like Allison and Bart Ehrman, and I can't remember exactly which one I read where I came to that view, but I think it was some combination of Ehrman and Allison. But I'd have to go back and recheck the things that I've read, so I'm not entirely sure what I changed my view from what to what in the course of 2 minutes. Not quite sure what you mean there, but sure.
Okay. So I have one final question from @9Jester. What would each side give as a probability that parts of the earthly ministry stories were an amalgamation of different apocalypse creatures? We'll start with Ben this time.
Could we reread the question? I don't think I understood the question.
You just want to see me trip over amalgamation again.
What
What would each side
You
give
got me.
what would each side give? So the question's for both of you. As a probability that parts of the earthly ministry stories were an amalgamation of different apocalypse preachers.
I don't know. I'd have to think more about that. Maybe John has a better answer to this. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I was messaging somebody in my own chat. What's the likelihood that there was an amalgamation of apocalyptic preachers?
Yeah, what is the probability that parts of the earthly ministry stories were an amalgamation of different apocalypse preachers?
Oh, so if you mean the Gospels, then I think that it's pretty highly likely that the Gospels, not the figure of Christ that Paul knew, I don't think that's a separate figure than what's represented in the earthly stories. But the earthly stories are most certainly sourced from various different sources out there, like the Passion narrative, I believe, in Mark is actually sourced from Jesus ben Ananias in the early first century. Right around that time, his whole
So at the risk of sounding like I'm interrupting, I think the question, sorry, John, is what is the probability that the figure of Jesus, the apocalyptic figure described as Jesus, was actually several different apocalyptic preachers that they then combined into one figure we call Jesus? I think that's the question.
Right. That is the question, Ben, and I was in the process of answering it.
Then I
separated
apologize.
out.
I apologize then.
That's okay. I separated out Paul's Jesus from the gospel Jesus, right? Because those are two different stories. They're two different figures, and the way that they crafted the earthly stories is by superimposing, the Christ figure of Paul onto real events that probably happened, like the Jesus ben Ananias. There's several parts of his assault on Jerusalem that are similar to the Passion of Jesus. And then you've also got the wider Hellenistic context, like you've got in Luke and Luke and Acts. You've got some Josephus in there. You've got some Homer's Iliad and Odyssey in there. So I mean, yeah, you've got a bunch of different sources that are being combined in order to craft these stories. So, I mean, if you're talking about the earthly wandering Jesus that is discussed in the Gospels, which is different than Paul's Jesus, then I think the probability is very high because we know of those things being there.
Do you want to add on to John's answer a little bit, Ben?
I don't think I have much to offer there because
All right.
I don't know.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I just wanted to give you the opportunity in case you
I
wanted to.
appreciate
That's
it.
all. Yeah, no worries. All right. Well, that was the thought experiment. That was the question. Did Jesus exist? I mean, you guys heard the arguments from John, the Godless engineer, and Ben. So what do you think? Let me know down below in the chat. And if you haven't hit like or subscribe, well, let me tell you what you're going to miss out on if you don't hit subscribe. So coming up next week, Skeptic Haven has added a lot of new programs. So everyone's support is necessary and great. So we have some awesome shows coming up on Sunday. So that's this Sunday in 2 days. All the times that I'll be mentioning here will be in Central Time, by the way. John, can I get you to mute for me, please?
So sorry about that.
Yep, no worries. There's all the times I'm going to mention here, are all Central Time. Okay, so if you're in a Central Time zone, cool. These are going to be your times. If you're not in a Central Time zone, you're going to have to Google what time zone you're in and make the right time so that you don't miss. This Sunday on Let's Talk, we've got AJ with Misinterpretations. And then we got on Wednesday, 7 p.m. Central, it's Drew Beckius and Apostasy with Life After Faith. Then we got a brand new show on Thursday, which AJ comes back for Critical Call. And this week she has Jason Tonks with her. And then an even newer show than Critical Call is the new show called Deconversionists with Alan and Elliot. So, and that one's on Friday at 4 p.m. So these are all Central Time. So you got Sunday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. That's one heck of a schedule, guys. So if you don't want to miss any of those, hit subscribe for me. Okay. We also have some great Patreon members here. So if you want to be a Patreon member, I'm sure there's a link in the description. And if you're already a Patreon member, well, then your name is Karen Butcher, Logan Fisher, Amanda McLeod, Ryan Dan D. The Bible says what? Sonny Shell, and Phil Padrone, Victor, and Kelly King. All right. So thank you to all of our awesome YouTube members. That would include Kellie Laughlin, Logan Fisher, Stop the Stupidiy, InfiDale, Angela, Skeptical Scott, David Ponciano, Erica 9706, Jason Freer, and Tons of Mice. So I also want to thank all of our lovely crew because they wrote those lines for me to say, including the thanking of themselves. So you guys can just think of that. But they are fantastic. And it's not lost on me how much work that the behind the stage crew puts into putting these shows together. It's a fantastic privilege as just a face personality or game show host, whatever you want to call me, to just show up and all the hard stuff is done. So if you've got nothing to add to the discussion and debate or nothing, just put a thank you in the comments down below. That would be really, really great. So if you would like to join the wonderful crew to get great comments like that down below about thank yous and good jobs, there's an opportunity because with all new shows means expansion. So You can email skeptichaven@gmail.com. And I would also just add in there, if you think you can handle the heat on stage live in front of an audience and there's a topic you want to debate, email skeptichaven@gmail.com. Let us know, if you want to come on and debate somebody, and we'll find an opponent for you, and you can be the next debater on the thought experiment. All right. So, just to top things off here, John, the Godless Engineer, thank you so much for your time. Ben, thank you as well for your time. Again, I assume their YouTubes will be down below in the chat. If they're not, that will be fixed, I'm sure. So head on over to both of their YouTube channels and subscribe to them as well. And yeah, I really have no more ranting left to do here. John, do you have anything you want to add?
I do want to implore everybody that's watching on TikTok and on my YouTube channel right now, which great, my thing decided to die right on time here. I'm gonna get through the streaming part thing here. Be sure to go and check out Skeptic Haven, everybody. They do great shows over on YouTube, so definitely check them out. I'm over there sometimes, so yeah, they're great.
Awesome. And then Ben.
Yeah, I would also like to give a plug to Skeptic Haven as well. I'd also like to thank for all the people behind the scenes. Thank for inviting me to participate in this, John. It was great to finally be able to sit down and have a discussion with you. To what I hope is we've been friends on Facebook for a while, but we finally got to get a little bit closer, and so I hope this is the first discussion in what is many discussions of a long friendship. And I appreciate the camaraderie from a fellow engineer. So cheers to you, buddy.
Yeah,
All right,
I'm
thank
sorry.
you so much, everyone.
I just want to say, yeah, I totally, I thought that this was a good discussion, good debate. I definitely appreciate being given the opportunity to talk with you there, Ben. So yeah, much love to you. No hard feelings or anything like that.
All right, great. Once again, thank you everyone so much for watching, and there's a busy week of shows coming up, so make sure you're subscribed. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for watching The Thought Experiment, the arena where religion, politics, and philosophy step into the ring and ideas get tested. Here, we don't dodge the hard questions. We confront them. We weigh arguments, challenge assumptions, and follow the evidence wherever it leads. If you enjoy sharp thinking and honest debate, you're in the right place. Like the video if you found it thought-provoking, subscribe so you never miss a debate. And most importantly, tell us in the comments who won tonight. We read them, we feature them, and sometimes they shape the next episode. Until next time, keep thinking. And we'll see you in the next thought experiment.